You're listening to Rhett Read Podcast. I'm Anna.
I'm Serge, and we're here to talk about books we've read.
Hope you enjoy.
Hey Anna.
Hey Serge.
Welcome to another episode of Rhett Read Podcast.
I hope everyone has enjoyed our latest RandoCast where we talk about our top 10 lists for Eurovision this year.
Yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy it as much as we enjoyed recording it.
And listening to all the songs again.
We still have that interview up that we did
with Matthew Isaac Sobin.
I just can't mention enough what a great honor that was. We had a blast talking to the guy about his latest book that is already out, and you guys should go and check it out and listen to the interview.
The book is called Last Machine in the Solar System, and Serge calls it a
good old romp through classic sci-fi, nice and short, so if you're like me and you're finding yourself being too busy to read a full-length novel, you could sit down with this book and finish it in a night. If your idea of a Friday night is to read a Fear Street novel, this is a great break from that. It takes about the same amount of time and is actually intellectually stimulating. Anna, is there any books that you've read recently you want to talk about?
I just finished a book called Ill Will by Dan, I don't know how to say his last name, I'm sorry, Chaon? It's Chaon. It was just released on March 7th of this year. I really wanted to like it more than I did. I feel like it's a concept book. Like, you know how some music artists have concept albums?
Right.
This is like the book version. But it's not quite House of Leaves or that J.J. Abrams book level of concept book.
Oh, the one about the ship?
Yes. Ship of Theseus, was it called?
Yeah.
Or it's called S, I think, in other places.
Yep.
It's a book about two grisly murders, one in 1983 and one spanning the years of 2012 to 2014. The central character is Dustin. He's a psychologist. His parents are murdered when he's a child, and then later there seems to be a string of what seems to be like unconnected but connected homicides where he lives now.
Wait, so is he like a werewolf? Like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or something, where at night he like sleep murders people?
No. He is not a reliable narrator in any shape or form. You don't get that many reliable narrators, so that's a problem in this book. So by the end, it's still a little puzzling over what happened. You still don't really have a concrete answer of who committed any crime.
I bet it was the Lizard Wereman.
So my issue was that I feel like it was a concept book in a lot of ways, and also I felt like because there's so many unreliable narrators, it's hard to tell where the story's going. For instance, Dustin as a character, he never has a complete thought. Things would just end mid-sentence, and characters would either fill in. If he's speaking to them, they'll fill in the end of his sentence. Or if he's just like narrating and you're getting his sort of monologue, things just sort of end abruptly. Mm-hmm. And that gets a little frustrating. At first it's like, okay, he's a quirky character. But then there's no ultimate payoff for it.
So it's just a character for the sake of existing.
It's clear what the author wanted to do. I just don't think he pulled it off.
So that's not exactly a glowing review, but you didn't hate it.
I didn't hate it because the thing is, the murder mystery aspect of it really draws you in. The entire time it's like, who did it? Who actually did it? Who murdered the parents and the aunt and uncle from 1983? And what's killing all these college kids? So the murders are like this. Dustin's parents and his uncle and aunt. His aunt is his mother's sister, and his dad is his uncle's brother.
Okay.
And one night, right before the two families, so his parents, his aunt and uncles, his cousins, his adopted brother was not going to go with them because he had to work. The night before they're supposed to go to Yellowstone, the adults are horribly murdered.
Okay.
And the blame goes on the foster brother because he's a supposed cultist, and Dustin and one of his cousins testified against the foster brother.
But then it turns out that maybe he's not really the murderer.
Yes, because he's released by the people who do the Innocence Project. You've heard of that, right?
Right.
Yeah, so he's released because the Innocence Project got a hold of his case. They say there's too many holes in the testimony.
Okay.
But the thing is, you don't really get enough of that backstory because most of that is happening from Dustin's point of view, the Innocence Project, and he does not want any part of it. And because he's such an unreliable narrator, like, you don't really get the full oomph of that. You get both of the cousin's point of view, and you get Randy, who's the foster brother's point of view, but I feel like a lot is skipped over just for the sake of making it a concept book. Like, at one point, the book is just split into, like, columns. Each column is a different point of view or a different timeline. You have to turn the pages for each column. So basically, you have to read each column, then you have to turn all the way back, and then read another column. Turn away. There's 3 columns on each page.
You know what I would do? I would choose one, read through that section, and just, the other two would be a mystery to me.
I don't know how or why you would do that, because you still need to read what's happening in the story. So you have to read each of these columns, and, that's kind of obnoxious.
For House of Leaves, they didn't do quite that, but there's a lot of similar things to that, and what I did is I just chose one and read just that.
You made it a choose-your-own-adventure?
Yeah, that's what I would do in this case, I feel, as well.
But it's not quite a choose-your-own-adventure, because you are missing part of the story, right?
I read the story that I liked, so I still gave that book a really good rating.
Yeah, I don't think that's something you could do with this book, because then it would have even less going for it, and you'd be like, well, you haven't explained this. I don't know. There's a lot missing. And then the current timeline, for 2012-2014, you get one of Dustin's sons, who has a horrible drug problem, and then there's a whole thing going on there, and everything is, interconnected. I feel like he wanted to do a deep character study with these characters, as well as having his concept book, and at the same time making it a murder mystery, but he didn't really do a good job of any of them, because the murder mystery, as intrigued as I was and as much as I wanted to know what happened, I was let down at the very end. And that was the main thing that kept me going. The characters themselves were not reliable, A, and B, they just were not compelling. Because they aren't compelling, because I don't really care about them.
Well, I could see that you weren't compelled by this book, because you're not conveying any sense of excitement about it. Just listening to you talk about it right now makes me realize, hey, I wouldn't be able to get through this book. Definitely not a book for me. Whereas sometimes I get one of your reviews and it's like, wow, that's exciting. I should probably look into reading that.
And I think that's what's ultimately disappointing about this book, because I did go in, I saw the Goodreads score, I think it's 3.46, maybe?
Right.
I want to say it's either 3.46 or 3.64.
So, you were telling me about this. Basically, it's lower than your normal threshold for reading a book, but you decided to give it a shot anyway, and you were pleasantly surprised at first.
So it has a 3.41 on Goodreads. My threshold for reading a Goodreads book by an author I don't know tends to be 3.7. So it's 3.75 for a YA book, and it's 3.7 for other books in general. Now this book is a 3.4. I think I might have brought it down to a 3.41, but I did get the ARC from NetGalley, and I wanted to give this book a chance because it is a new release. Maybe there's something going on, and let's take a look at it. So when I started reading the book, it grabbed me immediately. And I thought, I don't know why this rating is so low. Let's keep going, because I didn't want to read the reviews of why people hated it. So as I kept going, I was like, wow, this murder is really grabbing me. And then I kept going, and I went, this is kind of missing something. And as it kept going even more, at the end, I was just frustrated with the book. And I went, okay, I could see why it's rated lower. This guy is an award-winning author, I think. I should have read one of his award-winning books that would give him the leeway. When you read an author and you start liking the author, and then they write something totally off the wall that just isn't great, you tend to give them a little leeway because, I've read their other work and I know what they're capable of, so this book might have sucked, but hey, their other stuff is still great, and I see what they're doing here, and I'm glad they decided to widen their bubble.
Yeah, you mean Casual Vacancy? I kind of enjoyed reading that book, but I probably would never have read a book like that if it wasn't J.K. Rowling.
I think that one thing about a popular author doing a different book, you also run into the J.K. Rowling effect. I know a lot of people went into Casual Vacancy expecting a Harry Potter type book, but because of how dark and sad and depressing Casual Vacancy was, they immediately hated it. Maybe it's good that I hadn't read this author's previous work, because I went in fresh and not knowing anything about the guy, and this is just the most pure review that I could give this book, not being influenced in any way, shape, or form. With that, I will say that it's an okay book. I gave this book 3 stars. If you like murder mysteries, maybe give it a look. I do think he kind of wraps it up, but at the same time, I was just a little frustrated with how he did it, and I think he could have done a better job. And speaking of unsatisfying endings for books, after the intermission, we are going to talk about Fear Street, Lights Out. Now let's get into the prediction accuracy for Fear Street.
Lights Out.
I had some stuff right. So I said it was summertime and it's a girl during summer vacation. And I said that based on the cover, she's running from a murderer in the woods.
That definitely happened.
This is where I get... Horribly wrong.
This is where
I went on a whole rant during the prediction accuracy about how there's never any strangulation in Fear Street. And R.L. Stine has decided that strangulation is just beneath him. It will never happen in any Fear Street book ever. And I'm just going to stop predicting strangulation ever again.
And guess what, folks?
Strangulation!
Yeah, although you don't know it right away.
It's a very, very gory death scene.
Right, the body reveal is the goriest one so far.
So I said it was stabbing with a knife by a female, and I was completely wrong, every single thing. It was strangulation by a male. I did say it was by a peer, and I was correct.
Yeah, so I got the male murderer correct. Everything else, just like Anna, I got wrong. I got that it was early summer, so that's great. But Anna got that too. Murder weapon, I said it was going to be blunt object to the head. Nope, it wasn't. There might have been an attempted murder with a blunt object, maybe.
You also said it'd be by a complete rando.
Yeah, and it wasn't. It was one of the characters. We're not going to tell you which one right now.
But you also said it was a group of kids who went into Fear Woods.
That was wrong. Yeah, this is not in Fear Woods, although it is near Shady Side, a few dozen miles away, maybe.
But the point is, we were really, really off for this book.
I guess you can't really tell by the cover, but looking back at it, you can kind of see some of the things there. Maybe not. Yeah, so let's get into the plot synopsis here. We got usual stuff. There's no prologue. But you do get a little bit of letter format.
What happens in this book, unlike the other books where you do get a murderer's point of view, you don't get it in a prologue, which really stuck out to me. Instead, the first chapter is actually a letter from the antagonist to someone called Chief. It's signed me, which I thought was pretty different because usually when R.L. Stine has a point of view from the killer, it's in a prologue, and then the book starts from the main protagonist's point of view. So that's different. And then interspersed throughout the book, there are just different letters from the murderer to Chief.
Yeah, that narrative structure is really good. That was a great way to write this book. With every 6 or 7 chapters or so, you get a letter to Chief. The villain describes the latest bad thing that just happened and takes credit for it, and then hints at what their plan is next.
Yeah, so the various things that killer did was, first they tried to upend a cabinet on someone, they punched holes in a canoe, they loosened up a bunk bed, and they killed someone. And at each scene, there was a red feather stuck into something, be it a bolt hole or into a slat for the bunk bed.
Right, so the main character, Holly, finds all these feathers because she's basically at every single crime scene, and she links it all together, and she decides somebody's trying to sabotage the camp and shut it down, but nobody believes her.
Yeah, she's working at Camp Nightwing for the summer, and Camp Nightwing has a lake nearby called Feather Lake.
And it's just basically your typical summer camp in the woods. Bunch of kids living in cabins, having fun, lots of activities, canoeing and hiking and crafts and games and sports.
It's a co-ed camp, right?
It is a co-ed camp, yes. So there's male counselors and there's female counselors, and the girls stay in the girls' cabins and the boys stay in the boys' cabins, but they're all in the same camp together. So that's basically the plot synopsis.
Yeah, you just try to figure out who's sabotaging this camp and why, and then murder and all that good stuff.
Right, so Holly's trying to figure it out because nobody believes her. She has to do it on her own. So she's trying to Nancy Drew this thing.
Yes, because it's her uncle's camp and she loves him very much. But let's get into Holly.
So,
Holly Flynn. She is our one tie to Fear Street.
Yep, she lives on Fear Street. And she enjoys the old look of the mansions and houses there, and she just likes that architecture. That seems to be a common thread amongst a lot of the residents there. They just enjoy living in a big old house, which is understandable. Like many of the other residents of Fear Street, she doesn't believe in all the superstitious mumbo-jumbo.
She's working her Uncle Billy's camp because he needs all the help he can get, and she couldn't get a server job.
He's running this camp. He's been running it for 3 years, and basically...
He has not turned a profit.
Yeah, so she really is there just to help him out and make sure that he doesn't go under. And her mom is kind of like, this is his last chance. You have to do this. So she's reluctant to go because she doesn't actually like the outdoors. She's
described as tender-hearted, tall and lanky, with pale white skin and fair, pale hair.
And she is really into swimming and watercraft. She's used to a sailboat, but the camp doesn't have any of those. They have canoes and rowboats, but she's still good on the water. even though she describes herself as not outdoorsy, she can do activities. She can also do arts and crafts, so that's why she gets put on the arts and crafts and the watercraft committee.
I mean, just because you like water sports doesn't mean you're an outdoor person, right? She's not a bug person. She doesn't like snakes and all
But
that.
she has an in on how to get in on the camp.
She prefers reading over movies, and she's kind of slow on the uptake.
The thing I will say about her is that she is kind of methodical. A lot of the protagonists in the Fear Street series, they'll come up with a list of suspects, and then the first one that does anything suspicious, immediately, oh, they must be the one, and they go and accuse them. So she comes up, not even really with a list of suspects, she knows it's gotta be somebody at the camp, and she starts observing all of them for any sign of any suspicious activity. She doesn't go ahead and accuse anybody of it.
No, what she does is she tells them that she's investigating and everything that's happening, which I think is worse than other protagonists, because at least they just accuse the person straight off the bat. She literally thinks everyone is a suspect, and then goes down the list and tells everyone what the problem is and why she's like suspicious of everyone else, even if the person she's talking to is also on her list anyways. It makes no sense.
She might not realize the risks involved. I don't think she connected the dots and figured out, like, hey, if they've already killed once and attempted to kill before, they might, try to kill me. She doesn't quite get the sense of danger that she's in.
So like I said, she's kind of slow on the uptake, because there are a lot of scenes where you're just reading what she's doing and going, why are you doing this? You think this person's a murderer. What are you doing? What is wrong with you? They're on your suspect list.
She's kind of hard luck character, really. She doesn't really catch a break.
She ends up being sort of the Carrie of the camp, if you've seen Carrie or read Carrie.
That's right. Her old friend is
a bitch.
But
we'll get into her. Yeah. She actually has a friend from school there,
who's basically the only one that's nice to her.
Her name is Thea Mack. She was actually at the camp the previous year.
Thea didn't know that Billy was Holly's uncle, but Holly lets her know that and says, but don't tell any of the other people, because I don't want to be singled out, the niece of the guy who runs the camp, because she rightfully suspects that might cause issues. And guess what? It does end up coming out, and it causes a lot of problems for her. Thea is described as having short, dark curls. She's compact, muscular build, and has dark freckled skin. And what I noticed is a lot of the characters that were in the camp the previous year are described as having dark skin or freckled tan skin, whatever. And that kind of distinguishes the outdoorsy people from Holly, who is described as very pale.
So when Thea was at the camp last year, she met this guy named John, one of the male counselors, and they had a fling. So when Thea came back this year, she thought she could rekindle that romance, except John is cold towards her.
Yeah, not only is he cold towards her, he just seems like withdrawn and is really not talkative. It doesn't seem to be himself. Holly's reaction to him is like, well, this doesn't seem like the exciting guy that Thea's been talking up during the school year this whole time. So she doesn't get what the heck's going on, because he just seems like he's on planet Mars.
John Hardesty is described as compact, dark, and good looking. I took dark as meaning that maybe we got our first diverse character in the book, because while Serge had said earlier that he viewed dark as, outdoors, R.L. Stine does have an adjective with the dark for Thea. She's dark with freckles, or later Debra, darkly tanned.
Right.
So with these adjectives, I just assumed they're skinned out dark because of the sun, whereas John is just described as dark. And I thought that was a really interesting way of doing it. Like, maybe we have our first non-white character.
Right, and I didn't read it that way, but looking back on it now, it might be, in which case his race never comes up and everybody's super chill about it, so that's cool. Although, it might explain a thing about he's dating one of the campers there and her parents don't approve. It could be the age difference, but it could also be, maybe the parents are racist or something.
Yeah, it turns out he doesn't want to reignite anything with Thea because he's dating a 15-year-old girl named Courtney, and because there's a 3-year age difference between him and Courtney, her parents don't approve, and that makes sense because he's 18, he's an adult, and I don't think a parent of a 15-year-old would necessarily approve of that sort of age difference.
Sure, and the other problem is that this is pretty unprofessional, is in fact in violation of the camp rules.
Well, it's not in violation of camp policy because they're not allowed to date campers, but they were already dating prior to coming to camp. The reason Courtney came to camp was because John was going to work there, or vice versa. He was going to work there because she was going to camp.
Right, but then they meet secretly in the woods all the time.
Well, that violates the camp policy.
Right, exactly, because you're not allowed to, like, hold hands or make lovey-dovey eyes at each other or anything like that. And then he goes out of his way to get on the canoe trip because she's going.
Well, they sort of break up, and he's going on the canoe trip that comes up later in the book because he wants to win her back. But speaking of unprofessional characters in this book...
Yes, we got Jerry Marquez. She's a crazy, crazy girl. Absolutely insane. She's described as having strawberry blonde, blunt-cut hair, a dazzling smile, and creamy skin.
So she's from Waynesbridge.
Right, which is where Holly's originally from, and they used to be best buds.
Yeah, they were on the swim team together. They were actually sort of equals on the swim team, but instead of becoming rivals, they became best friends.
It sounds like they had a really good relationship, except it turns out that Jerry is just completely selfish and incapable of understanding other people. One of Holly's character traits is that she cannot tell a lie. I mean, she could try, but she'll just screw it up. It just won't happen. And as her best friend, Jerry's supposed to know this about her, but she still relies on her to tell a lie to her mother because she's sneaking off to date a boyfriend that she's not allowed to be with. And she pretends to be at Holly's house. So Holly has to lie. If Jerry's mom calls, Holly has to lie.
But when Jerry's mom calls Holly, she panics.
And screws it up completely.
And she goes, Jerry was never here.
Yeah.
And then her mom goes, you guys are supposed to be studying. And she's like, oh, I mean, she hasn't gotten here yet. And she's like, it's 11 o'clock. And Jerry got in a lot of trouble for that.
Instead of understanding that, hey, it was a mistake, she decides that Holly was jealous and sabotaged her on purpose. Yeah, just basically completely freaks out and decides that Holly is her lifelong enemy. Just sworn enemy. I don't even get that. This is the kind of twisted mind you expect from one of his villains, basically. This is the kind of stuff that leads people to lock people in a kitchen and set the thing on fire. This character is messed up. I would not be surprised if she comes back later as a villain or something, because she is on a path and sadistic, right?
Well, we'll get into that after we introduce her.
And she's always described as having like this gleeful like smile whenever anything bad is happening to Holly. She just...
It gets her rocks off, basically.
Oh my, yeah, she's literally getting off on it. It's ridiculous. So, wow. What a nasty, nasty character.
Well, one of the reasons she's super pissed at Holly is because there's a guy at the camp called Mick who looks like a dangerous Kevin Bacon. Mick is hitting on Holly a lot, but Jerry actually likes Mick. So she thinks that Holly is once again meddling in her love life, and she is just unhappy with that. And Mick lives on a farm in Belleville.
He like throws that out there. I bet you didn't think I was from a farm, because he is, or maybe he thinks he is, kind of sophisticated, but...
He's actually a few steps away from, like, I don't know, date rape.
There's no steps. He's sexually harassing Holly all the time. He thinks that the way you come onto a girl is by grabbing her and telling her that they should go and bang.
Yeah, I think he doesn't take no for an answer. He gets really angry and upset when she says, get away from me.
He keeps forcing himself on her. Sometimes in the middle of the night, like in the woods. Another time, like on a boat dock, where they were by themselves.
Good on Holly, because she ends up shoving him right into the water.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Jerry is actually in the woods watching this, and instead of going, oh my god, are you okay? She just goes, I heard everything, and you're just trying to ruin things between me and Mick, and I won't let you forget this. And it's like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah. Mick is just another character that you really want to hate and do dislike a lot.
Well, he has no redeeming qualities the entire time. He is literally trying to force himself on Holly, and he just has never heard the word no. He's disrespectful. Like, even when she is very adamant, like, I want to get to know you, but not like this. He tries to call her out on leading him on, even though she hasn't, and he starts demanding she do things to him.
It's really bad. My take on him is his redeeming quality is the first sentence that usually comes out of his mouth at the beginning of a conversation. But by the time the second sentence is there, he's already sexually harassing Holly.
How does the first sentence redeem him?
It's not redeeming. It's just like the one thing about him that's not vile. He says some like interesting thing that kind of hooks her, and she's like, oh, maybe he's an interesting guy that I might want to get to know. But then like sentence 2, he's already just a disgusting pig. Yeah, wow. So him and Jerry are pretty awful. But then you have Kitt Damon, who is just another ridiculous character you end up not liking.
He's described to have a pale face with freckles and light blue eyes, and really weird is how Thea describes him.
If I can interrupt, Holly's like, is he weird or what? Thea goes, what? And weird.
Yes. But the thing is, he worked at the camp last year, and he almost got kicked out of camp. But because Uncle Billy cannot find anyone to work for his camp, he actually hires Kitt again this year.
Yeah, last year he had a prank that went a little bit overboard. I guess maybe some campers got hurt. So he almost got fired and he had to come back. Basically, Bill can't pay very well.
The introduction to Kitt in the book is when all the counselors are sitting around a fire, just like introducing themselves. And all of a sudden, a person dressed in a dark shirt and pants and a hockey mask with a hatchet starts like advancing towards them, and like people are freaking out, and Holly is like, oh my god, and Uncle Billy just looks over and goes, stop it, Kitt, it's not funny.
He's also got this stupid sense of humor, kind of like that character from Fear Street.
Ricky Shore.
Ricky Shore. He's got Ricky Shore's sense of humor.
I don't think Ricky Shore is as malevolent.
Ricky Shore's not a practical joker as much. This guy gets, like, really, really deep into his practical humor, but it's, again, not funny. And like Anna said, he has just got a mean streak. He's friends with Jerry.
He has a crush on Jerry.
Yeah.
He follows her around like a little puppy, and she ignores him until she needs him.
And usually she needs him to harass Holly, and he's more than happy to do that. Basically, we've described the whole trio of characters here that are just...
heinous.
The heinous bunch. So basically, Jerry's like the ringleader, and she's spurring them all on against Holly, and so they do this little initiation rite, where they gang up on her in the woods. Actually, one of them chases her into the woods, and then the others grab her, threaten her with a bucket full of leeches that...
Well, they throw her in the mud, and it gets to the point where she can't even stand up on her own. She needs help standing up, and they keep pushing her down.
And then they throw the bucket of leeches, they throw those on her. Some of them stick to her.
And she's screaming, please stop, and they're just laughing.
Yep, especially Jerry, who's just really enjoying... Jerry actually wants them to go further. Mick decides they've gone too far. Apparently, this endears him in Holly's eyes somehow. I think Jerry, would have been happy to continue torturing Holly till she was dead at this point.
But this is actually similar to a scene in The Fireman.
Huh, which scene?
There's a scene where the way that they punish people in that camp is that you need to put a stone in your mouth.
Right.
And because the Mary Poppins lover, she does not feel like this stone thing is normal. She refuses to put stones in her mouth. So a person who is being punished for something can only end her punishment once Mary Poppins' character puts the stone in her mouth. She's like, no, I'm not going to do it. This is stupid and this is barbaric and we are better than that. A group of people ambush her in the woods and she's pregnant.
Yeah.
But they start beating her and kicking her, and she's blindfolded, and then they shove a stone in her mouth and duct tape her mouth shut, and then they all just scatter.
Yeah, that makes me fucking hate those stupid cultists in that Fireman book.
Once again, we find that Joe Hill draws inspiration from R.L. Stein.
Yeah, I mean, these two books are back to back, right? First you have The Fire Game, now you have Lights Out. One has the whole fireman, character genesis. And now Lights Out, we have the whole setting of the summer camp with weird initiation. I mean, basically, we're on to you, Joe Hill.
We found your reading list.
Yeah.
Next up in characters, we have Sandy Wayne, a tall, handsome boy with sun-streaked blonde hair from Center City.
Yeah, so he teaches tennis and wilderness camping, but his main character trait is that he seems to be a rich kid. He's described as wearing $200 Porsche brand sunglasses.
I didn't know that Porsche brand had sunglasses, but hey.
I guess this is the one car reference in the book.
Well, he seems to be the only character that isn't going out of his way to torment Holly. So while she's being tortured by Kitt, Mick, and Jerry, she thinks she sees Sandy standing off in the side with a wicked grin on his face, but then she looks again, he's gone, so she doesn't know what's going on there, but he seems to be the only person that isn't odd. Next up, we have the senior counselor of the bunch. She's been here for 3 years now at Camp Nightwing, Debra Wallach.
Yeah, and so she's actually the senior counselor, and she's staying in the same cabin as Holly, and they really get off on the wrong foot.
Deborah just hates on Holly.
I didn't really like Deborah's character. She seems really unprofessional in how she hates on Holly in front of the kids. You're not supposed to, air your grievances in front of the campers like that.
I mean, she's described as beautiful, darkly tanned skin with long, shiny black hair, but she also has a bit of an attitude problem.
And an owl necklace.
Very important.
So I initially suspected her of being the person behind all the murders.
I thought she would be a red herring, so I didn't suspect her. You know, when all these things are happening, so we described in the beginning that a bunk bed in the cabin, like, falls on a camper, which is, like, a horrible thing. So Holly rushes to the scene, and she gets the camper out, and everyone's crying, and she tries to comfort the camper that was crushed. And then Debra runs in and asks, like, what did you do to the bed? What's wrong with you? You can't do anything. Like, everyone's crying. Don't you know how to comfort the campers?
They're probably crying because you just started yelling.
It's, like, the most awful thing ever. And every interaction they have, Debra is just yelling at her, being really passive-aggressive, to the point where the campers are asking Holly, why doesn't Debra like you? Like, little kids are smart, first of all. I was a camp counselor, and I worked with kids that were these kids' age and also younger. Kids are very perceptive, first of all. But when you're that obvious about it, kids are gonna really, really notice, and they're gonna be wondering, like, what's going on. And they're also going to respect both of you less as adults, because senior adult is, like, being a complete psycho, and junior counselor is being screamed at, so maybe junior counselor doesn't know what she's talking about. And it's just, like, horribly unprofessional in a camp setting.
Yeah, you don't want to undermine your own authority like that. I also worked at a summer camp, and this is a big, big no-no. If this situation was going on at the camp where I worked, both of the counselors would have been pulled aside and talked to by senior administrative staff.
This camp had no senior administrative staff.
This is one of the big problems here, is that the only senior staff the camp has is basically Debra, it seems like. And she's basically just a regular counselor, but she's not qualified to be like a senior assistant to Uncle Billy. Uncle Billy seems to be doing 10 different things at once at any given moment. He's trying to do this whole thing single-handedly. He's so out of it, things slipping through the cracks left and right. So, yeah, it's pretty tough. Because, you know, you do need a large staff to run these things. The head of the camp also has to be kind of like a figurehead, and all the kids are going to really look up to them, and so they have to be there for the kids as well. They can't be doing all the administrative stuff all the time, because then they're not going to be there as the face of the camp. So they need a bunch of staff working in the background doing stuff like communicating with the vendors, which he seems to be doing all the time. You need to be, you know, running the kitchen. You need to be setting up all the equipment, all this stuff. He's just letting the counselors run most of the day-to-day stuff in the camp, all the equipment and all the classes, and then I guess he's doing all of the administrative phone calls and arranging all that stuff. He doesn't seem like he has any time to spend with the kids whatsoever.
Well, not just that. I mean, like any company has an HR person. The camp doesn't have an HR person because Uncle Billy is so busy working with the vendors, making phone calls, trying to do everything, 100 things at once, that the camp counselor relationships go by the wayside. So I was a senior counselor, and as a senior counselor, I had JCs, junior counselors, working with me. And above me, I had people in charge of just the counselors themselves. And above her was someone in charge of the senior and the junior counselors. And then there was someone in charge of just the junior counselors. So each counselor group had someone in charge. So if there was a situation where two counselors didn't get along, we would either be taken aside and talked to, or you would just switch the counselors to a different cabin and they don't have to interact ever.
It seems like Billy was just letting this particular problem just fall to the wayside because he had a million other things to worry about.
I mean, why couldn't Thea have been moved to this cabin? Or why couldn't Jerry have been moved to this cabin? I mean, it just didn't make sense.
It was a situation that was really getting out of hand. It was just one blowout after another.
Or because Holly couldn't get a job, why didn't they just say, hey, you know what? Your uncle really needs you over the summer. He can't pay you well, but he can pay you something, but it's free room and board and something you can put on your resume for college. Or, like, you know, your CV for college that, like, you volunteered or you were in the administrative staff for this camp. And you wouldn't have had any of these issues to begin with because he would have had someone helping him with all the office work.
She could have just been the administrative assistant for this camp, and she could have been organizing all the shipments and deliveries and all the stuff, and he could be doing the actual job of being the head of the camp.
I mean, the camp I worked at was a very high-end camp, so I know that a lot of the things I experienced in the camp I worked at are different because of the price range to go to that camp, and I know that probably lower-end camps are not as run by administrative people. They probably don't have that, but this is just not how you run a camp at all. I just have to say, like...
It's little wonder that he's going to go out of business.
And Debra, whatever she was as a senior counselor, was not going to be as helpful as he thought she would be.
I don't think she's very competent at all. In fact, later on it's revealed that she may have been involved in the accidental death of a camper.
Which is one of the things that he was worried about his camp closing, because a camper had died the previous year. And he is like, listen, I can't get enough staff. I'm worried about my camp closing because I had a camper die last year, so we have a really bad reputation. So this year, I am going to hire the same unqualified people
that led to that situation arising to begin with.
It makes no sense, Uncle Billy. This is when you have a better hiring process and try to, change the image of your camp, not hire the exact same people. Debra was in charge when a child died.
Yeah, maybe this should be a wake-up call and you should reevaluate your priorities. Ask yourself, why are you running this camp? Are you running it to make children happy? If so, what are you doing wrong that campers are dying?
Hiring Debra.
Yeah.
And she was actually your main suspect, starting from what page?
Her introduction.
Why don't we get into the in-depth plot and talk about what happens to Debra?
Yeah, so Deborah's the first death. We already mentioned this. This is the goriest body discovery scene in all of Fear Street so far. Holly finds the body, and she's gonna need some serious counseling after this.
Holly stepped all the way into the cabin, flipping on the light as she did, and stopped in shock. Everything in the room, the floors, the walls, was covered with bright red splatters. Splatters of blood. Blood that was flying from the spinning electric potter's wheel. Holly continued to look horrified and sickened. The wheel turned rapidly, on each pass rubbing away more of the thing slumped over it. The thing that she saw had once been a human face, but was now a bloody mass of raw pulp.
Yep, that face ground to a pulp by a potter's wheel. Pretty messed up.
It turns out someone had strangled Debra and
made it look like an accident.
Yeah, it made it look like the owl had caught into the potter's wheel and that she was pulled into it.
So that kind of put the kibosh on my theory. At that point, I already thought maybe it's not her. You do start to suspect any number of the guys, plus Jerry. Well, I never really suspected Jerry. Which is strange, right? Because she's so crazed. She's so completely and totally crazed.
Well, the reason I didn't think it was Jerry was because she was very upfront with her absolute batshittery.
Yeah, and she doesn't hate the camp. She just hates Holly. You know what her singular focus is. If the letters to Chief were all about how Holly has to die, okay, yeah, it's obviously Jerry. If Holly's not mentioned in any of the letters to Chief, then you know it's not Jerry, because Jerry seems to spend her entire life thinking about Holly and ways to, get back at her for this perceived slight.
I mean, I feel like the person who got two guys to beat someone in the mud and then dump leeches and torture them, they would not be, "Dear Chief, today I undid a bed and then put a feather in it." She'd be like, "Hey, bitches, it was me. Is Holly dead yet?"
Yep.
So, that is why it's pretty obvious it was not Jerry.
Definitely not her.
But I have to say, I was very surprised. Do we want to talk about who did it and why?
Yeah, let's get into it. I was completely taken aback. I did not see this guy being the me character.
Yeah, so it turns out the boy who died the previous year, he had a stepbrother, and they were pretty close. The stepbrother's, the kid who died, his nickname was Chief, hence the letters to Chief.
He had these red feathers that he liked. That was basically it, right? The Chief had some red feathers that he liked.
His stepbrother was actually the one quote-unquote normal guy in the camp, Sandy. And the funny thing is, Holly was just telling Sandy everything. I find these feathers and something's happening and we need to investigate, and I told a detective and blah, 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 and it's just ugh.
Billy really knows how to pick him. Uncle Billy says, if I had known that this guy was the stepbrother of the kid who died, I wouldn't have hired him. Wow, nice background check. Can you imagine? You got Shady Side High School and how bad they are with background checks. This camp is 10 times worse. You could get a serial child molester working here and Uncle Billy would never ever know.
Right? Because I know when I went to work at the camp, I gave my social security number and everything. They ran a full background check on me.
Yeah, because you don't want somebody to come in and hurt your kids.
Right? That's like the normal thing to do.
Uncle Billy doesn't provide even the basic level of security that any parent would expect, sending their kids away to summer camp.
Well, the fact that the camp is still running after someone is pulped in the Arts and Crafts Center tells me a lot about this camp.
This shuts down the camp.
Yes, in real life, this would shut down a camp for the season.
Yeah, because what would happen is an inspector would come and be like, okay, how are you even running this camp? And then they'd find out that Uncle Billy probably doesn't have any of his paperwork in order.
Does he even have insurance for his camp?
I don't know if he has insurance. I don't know if his kitchen is up to code. You know, they'd probably come in and inspect and find all the cockroaches and stuff. I mean, who knows?
Camp should have been shut down. You have one death. Okay. You have a second death another year. Something is wrong with your camp.
Game over, man. Go find something else to do.
And the thing is, at the end of the book, when they find out that one of the counselors is like a fucking murderer, insane person, they still haven't shut down the camp.
Nope.
And now they are 2 counselors short and not getting any new counselors.
That's correct. And they still got another batch of kids coming in later. Because it's only like a 4-week camp or something. So there's going to be another group of kids coming in.
Yeah, it's one of those 4 weeks or a full 8-week camp. Which is what I worked in. And that's not how it works. It's very puzzling. But anyway, Sandy is really pissed that this camp is responsible for his stepbrother dying. And because Debra was leading the trip that his brother died on, he needed to get revenge by taking out Debra. But not just taking out Debra, he needed to shut down that camp.
So all the sabotage that's been going on was in order to shut the camp down. But he just didn't know how stupid/persistent Uncle Billy is.
Didn't part of the camp burn down the previous year?
I think it might have, yeah.
Like, the camp burned down at one point. He's still going on, so Sandy could have literally burned the entire place to ashes, and Uncle Billy would have been like, well, okay, well, I'll just tie a bunch of tarps on trees, and we'll keep going.
Yep, Uncle Billy, he just never has any luck with any of his businesses, and this one is no different.
At some point, Holly is trying to tell Uncle Billy, like, listen, I found these feathers in every single scene. It's kind of weird. Like, even in Debra's crime scene, she's like, I found a feather there too. Uncle Billy's, listen, this is a summer camp. Feathers tend to get stuck places. It's normal. And it's like, Uncle Billy, why would there be a feather stuck in a boat hole that was holding up your cabinet? Yeah. Why would there be a feather shoved in a gunwale of a canoe? He just was not having it. And the thing is, after Debra's death, the police come on the scene, and Holly decides, like, I'm gonna tell a detective what's going on because he'll take me seriously. And they're just like, yep.
Yeah, he just humors her for a bit and then just sends her packing.
And I love the idea that there's just like a crime scene at this camp, and the camp is still going on. The investigators like could not give any shits about his death.
They did end up interviewing all the counselors for like 2 days. It took them to do that. I'm sure the kids all loved that.
What is going on?
There's no way you can keep it from the kids at that point. It seems like they tried, and maybe the kids didn't know what happened, but the kids would have figured it out.
But the real question is, did they still use the arts and crafts room the entire time? Did Uncle Billy...
You can't. It's covered in blood.
Yeah, so did he hire one of those, like, professional cleaners to clean the blood and, like, the body parts that are everywhere? He clearly didn't, but then how can you have a camp without an arts and crafts room? None of the counselors can go in there to get the crafts out because it's a crime scene, so everything needs to stay as it is. So
also, who wants to go clean up the blood? Not any of the counselors.
Well, no, you need a professional cleaner to do that.
Right. They don't have that kind of money. Just burn it down to the ground.
Right?
Hey, kids, it's bonfire time.
I don't even get it. And the thing is, I was kind of surprised. I thought the story would take a turn that Jerry would just, like, blame Holly for it and get Kitt and Mick to tell the cops that Holly's unstable. She never got along with Debra. But that never came. So let's keep going with the whole Sandy thing.
Sandy actually seems like one of the normal guys, but yeah, it turns out he's crazy, and he's a wilderness trip leader. So he's leading a canoe trip. It's an overnight trip. Holly's gonna be there, and so are
Kitt, Mick, Jerry, and John. Every single person who has a grudge against Holly. See, John's issue with Holly is that after Debra's death, Holly decided that if the police aren't going to investigate and Uncle Billy don't care, then I'm going to get to it. So she decides to go into the guy's cabin and start rummaging through their stuff to find evidence.
She's very surprised because Kitt is actually very neat. He has all his clothing folded up nicely, but then like his entire drawer full of like props for his stupid pranks. And then she's looking through John's thing, and he has like a locked box, and she finds the key, and she's about to unlock it, but he walks in on her. So this is the part Anna was talking about earlier, where you don't tell your suspects everything you've found out so far.
If he walks in, he's like, what are you doing in my room? And she tells him everything. First of all, you have the key to his lockbox. You're basically telling him that you're investigating a crime and that he's a suspect, but then you're telling the suspect everything. Like, make anything up. She first says, I thought Kitt found something of mine and I came to get it. And he's like, well, why do you have my key? And why are you looking through my stuff? And she's just like, listen, okay? There's feathers everywhere and things are happening and I need to investigate.
Yeah, it was like, I mean, the thing is, she cannot tell a lie, right? So she wasn't going to be able to make anything up. She tried and then just defaulted to telling the truth. That's her character trait, right? So she's just staying true to what her character is.
So the canoe trip happens, and Holly is...
She's like the black sheep.
No one wants to be in a canoe with Holly, and it's really embarrassing for her. Like, Jerry's like, I don't want to be with her. And then they just, like, try to ignore her.
She ends up with Mick, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't really talk to her very much.
He ignores her the entire time.
Because he's still butthurt that she wouldn't let him rape her, basically.
How dare she?
All the girls on the farm sure do like banging me. I don't understand. It's with these uppity town folk. They actually end up going on the same river where Sandy's brother, Chief, died the previous year. Which is, again, ridiculous. There's like a dangerous rapid there, and they're like, yep, we're just gonna send people down the same dangerous rapid again.
Well, can we talk about how many counselors go on this boating trip?
Oh, they have a really good counselor to camper ratio.
That means their counselor to camper ratio back at camp is really bad.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe they sent extra counselors because it's such a dangerous canoe trip.
Maybe they should go on a different canoe trip.
Maybe they shouldn't be going on the same river where a kid died last year. I mean, some of these kids are repeat campers. They might have known the kid that died on that same trip. Don't you think it's a little traumatic to be sending them on the same freaking trip again? It just boggles the mind.
Well, you were a trip leader at camp, were you not?
That's right. And we actually got to select the trip and plan where we would go. As the person doing that, I would not select a river section that had led to a death. Not that there had ever been a death at our camp. It was explained to us that a death would result in the camp shutting down, essentially. That this normally kills the camp. As a wilderness trip leader, I had to have a wilderness first responder certification as well as a lifeguard certification. So we had to be able to rescue somebody in case of drowning and be able to administer not only first aid, but also be able to stabilize a person until help arrived and stabilize them from any kind of injury you could think of. We were very well prepared coming into any trip. We were also given a satellite phone in case we were out of service range, which we often were. There's a long list of procedures and there's a lot of training, weeks and weeks of training you have to go through in order to be put in this kind of situation. Maybe Sandy was qualified, but he was mentally unbalanced. That kind of stuff should get weeded out during the interview process and background check.
And it was not. But the reason, obviously, Sandy chose this part of the river was because he knew that Holly was onto him or onto someone. Mm-hmm. So she had told everyone that she was like investigating this. So he knew that he had to take her out. I don't think he chose it. I think this was just their default place to go because he was like, yeah, we rent canoes and we'll like take the canoe company will like bring us there. And it's like, yeah, that's Uncle Bill's bad actually.
Yeah. And also if that company is renting canoes to this camp, that means it's on their canoe rental that some kid died. So that's on them too, that they're running canoes on this dangerous river section where people die. The whole thing just doesn't make any sense.
They should at least say to Uncle Billy, like, listen, you had a camper die in these rapids last year. How about you go to a slower part of it that don't have like class 3 rapids or class 4 rapids?
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. This is another nitpick. We've got a very rapidly flowing section of the river where you have rapids. But rapids basically means there's going to be a swift current. But we have people paddling upstream here. Paddling upstream is difficult enough in a gentle flowing stream. This is a rapid raging river here. And there's some upstream paddling going on. It's just like, what is even going on? You can't do that. I mean, you can. It's just very difficult.
They embark on their canoe trip. The first day, Holly is ostracized and they like make camp. Holly brings up the rear with her canoe and Sandy's in the front. And she goes to sleep and then she gets awoken early in the morning by Sandy. He goes, hey, why don't you come scout out the river with me? And first of all, Holly, like Serge said, river current, it goes one way. So if you're scouting out your day's trip, your first question should be, how are we getting back? Are we portaging our canoe?
Yeah, and they aim to be back in time for breakfast. before the campers even miss them. Like, no. As soon as you paddle more than a few hundred yards, that's it. You're going to be paddling back for over an hour upstream.
Because Uncle Billy doesn't hire people that actually know shit about the canoe trip, and
Holly.
She goes, okay, let's go. We'll be back before breakfast, right? And he's like, yep, let's go.
As the trip leader, you don't grab a counselor and go and abandon the campers. This is just not done. What if an emergency situation arises and now you just left the campers with a bunch of junior counselors? No.
I don't think Sandy cares at this point. He just wants to kill Holly.
Right.
But what would his excuse have been?
To get away with it?
Yeah.
I don't think he cared about getting away with it at this point.
Because he did have some weird elaborate thing like, oh yeah, I would say that you fell out and drowned, but it's like, but why are you guys on the water in the first place? Like, it's your responsibility.
You know what? Honestly, Uncle Billy probably wouldn't think anything was abnormal about that. It's just like, what was Deborah's excuse for getting that kid killed last year, right? He still let her come back the next year. Yeah, I don't think Sandy would get questioned too much. Yeah, maybe he would get away with it, actually. This is how pathetic this camp is.
But the thing is, if anyone ever tells you that they want to scout a river with you while you're on the trip, the answer is don't go. This is something you do beforehand. You look at the maps, you read online, you read about the currents. I've planned river trips. That's how you do it.
Exactly. If you're a wilderness trip leader and you have to scout out the route, that means you didn't prepare for this trip. That you've really messed things up at this point. Like, you have a map, you have a plan, you've talked to people who have previously done that section beforehand that also work at the camp. You get their input.
Well, the one person who did run the camp last year was, like, ground by a potter's wheel. So...
Yeah. What the fuck, right?
What a brutal scene to read.
Yeah.
I have to say, I read that and I said, what the fuck?
Yeah, me too.
I definitely WTF'd out loud because that was so gory. And I have not read something that gory in a Fear Street book before.
On the one hand, this book was kind of nostalgic for me, having worked at a summer camp before.
As it was for me as well.
But on the other hand, it's like, it really puts things into perspective.
Maybe that's why the camp I worked at did not have a potter's wheel.
Yeah, no, the insurance costs would have probably been astronomical.
So anyways, Sandy wakes Holly up and goes, let's scout out the river. And she goes, okay. And then they go canoeing and they start talking. And then Holly starts asking questions.
And then this is where Sandy's plot wears kind of thin. He told her a whole bunch of lies earlier, or half-truths, and she basically uncovers everything. And then he's like, okay, well, actually, tells his backstory about his brother, Chief, how he wants to shut the camp down. He killed Debra, and now he's going to kill her.
I guess my problem is that I've been a little careless. What do you mean? But you've been careless too, Holly. Wait, what do you mean? I mean, he said, that you didn't tell anyone that you were coming with me. And she's just like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I said you'd been careless. You didn't tell anyone you were coming with me. And she's like, well, of course I didn't tell anyone. You said we'd get back before they woke up. And then slowly it comes out.
Yeah, she hasn't figured it out yet at this point that he's about to, murder her.
I already told you I was careless. And now you've been careless too. That's what happens at Camp Nightwing. People get careless. And you know what?
It's true.
He's not wrong. Carelessness. For instance, Debra. Debra was careless. Then she's like, well, I mean, it was an accident, right? Right? He's like, I was talking about last summer. Last summer, Debra was careless on a canoe trip. It was a wilderness trip, just like this one. There were 6 counselors and 15 campers, just like this one. 6 counselors and 15 campers left Camp Nightwing for their wilderness. 6 counselors came back, but only 14 campers. All because Debra was careless. It wasn't an accident. An accident happens by chance. This one was caused by Debra and her carelessness. So then he talks some more about his stepbrother Seth, who died. And it isn't until another 2 pages that Holly finally figures out Seth is Sandy's brother, and he is really upset that his brother died on this trip. And then it takes her... How many more pages does it take her to figure out that she is going to die?
Yeah.
4 more pages go by before she realizes that he wants to kill her. Like I said, she's very slow on the uptake.
She has to jump out of the canoe, swim for the shore. She's a really strong swimmer, so she's able to... she makes it to shore, and she has to basically bushwhack through the woods to make it back, except that he comes after her. He thought she was going to drown, He kind of starts paddling the canoe upstream while keeping an eye on her. When he notices that she actually makes it to shore, that's when he's like, okay, I have to go after her. So he takes the canoe upstream, also goes into the woods and goes after her. There's a showdown. They confront each other.
And there's a great scene. He tries to hit her with a branch and she gets away. And then she, like, sees this opening, like a cave type thing.
Yes, that's right. So she's like, I bet I could run into that cave and sort of barricade myself in there and he wouldn't be able to do anything. And so she runs up the hill. As she's running up the hill, he smacks her foot with the branch, but she keeps running, but she's really, really hurt and she starts to feel numb. And she gets to the hole and it's filled with snakes.
She has a phobia of snakes.
And bugs.
Kitt had already fooled her by throwing a rubber snake at their cabin table during lunch, and she freaks out, and, Debra's still alive at this point. She's like, it's a rubber snake, how useless can you be? And then later...
She also has a garter snake that crawls into her bed.
No, Sandy puts it there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Sandy puts a coiled up snake in her bed. And once again, Holly freaks out. And again, Debra goes, what's wrong with you? It's just an innocent little snake. Oh, you're so useless. And this is in front of all the campers, by the way, both these times. Like, Debra is just relentless. And then she dies, So she goes in, and there's a writhing mass of a nest of hissing snakes.
But she gets over her phobia a little bit. She's like, you know what? I can deal with it.
There's either this murderer behind me or these snakes in front of me.
Does she just grab a snake and start fighting him with a snake in her hand or something?
She grabs the nearest snake and then heaves it in Sandy's face. Freaks him out.
Yes.
He lets go and, falls down the hill.
Yep.
It might have, broken every bone in his body while doing that.
He is, I think he gets knocked out. So this is actually reminiscent of The Overnight, aka Canoe Adventure.
Well, this is more of a canoe adventure than that one.
Yeah, so basically Canoe Adventures end up with somebody getting thrown down a hill. Okay, and then this is really random. Mick shows up. And he's like, oh yeah, I've been following you since I saw you sneaking off with Sandy.
I decided I wanted to apologize to you. I thought I'd talk to you early in the morning before the others woke up, but then I saw Sandy come and talk to you. And when the two of you went off in the canoe, I decided to follow just to see what you were up to.
What? Right? It doesn't make any sense.
Even his good intentions.
Sounds like he wants to go and rape her in the woods, basically.
After the police are called and everything's explained and Uncle Billy comes by and goes...
And all the kids are crying.
Yeah, all the kids are crying and I'm sure Holly's not doing a good job comforting them because whatever. And then Uncle Bill says, can you imagine he actually killed Debra, strangled her? I had no idea. Seth, the boy who died last year, was his stepbrother. They had different last names. How could I have known they were related?
I don't know. How could you have known? So bad. Maybe the home address is the same. Have you thought of that one?
Maybe the parents? I don't know.
Exactly.
Maybe a background check?
Yep.
And then he
also,
says,
how did the parents let this kid go work at the summer camp where his brother died?
Maybe they're so distraught over their son's death they haven't paid attention to him. But Uncle Billy then says at the end of the book, maybe now Camp Nightwing can go back to being a happy place again. And it's like, dude, when was Camp Nightwing ever a happy place?
It's his happy place, I guess. Somehow, even nothing good ever happens.
The last page of the book is an interaction between Mick and Holly. Mick goes up and says, how are you doing? You okay? And she goes, yeah, I am. Thanks to you. And he goes, aw, shucks. Someone throws a fake snake at them. I don't even know where the snake comes from, but a fake snake just drops in their path. And she picks up the snake and throws it out and just says, it's just a snake. And he goes, wow, Mick said, his mouth open in surprise. I'm impressed. You've changed, Holly. I think you're catching on to this place. Yes, I think I am, Holly agreed. And I think from now on, I'm going to like it here. Me too, Mick said quietly. He put his arm around her, and they wandered happily up the path to their cabins. What?
Yeah, pay attention, little boys. If you're persistent enough with your sexual harassment, eventually the girl will say yes, is the lesson of the book.
When he says, I think you're catching on to this place, what does that mean? You need to be submissive and not care about all the rapey rape that happens in this camp and be okay with my unwanted sexual advances? Is this gonna help her problem with Jerry as well? I'm so confused. Isn't this gonna make it worse because Jerry's gonna be even more butthurt? I don't see how any of this is a happy ending.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Uncle Billy is back in his little dream world of, my camp is wonderful. It's a kid died last year. A counselor was murdered. You hired a psychopath. You're down 2 counselors.
Yeah, I don't know how the camp is still open.
And by the way, that means the Arts and Crafts Center, if it was still being used to this point, now it can't be used because it now officially is a crime scene, no?
Yeah, so Holly doesn't have anything to do because all the canoes have holes in them, so there's no boating. The craft center is a murder scene, so I guess she's just gonna, bang Mick the rest of the summer, and that's it.
But no, because Jerry is now the senior counselor in the cabin she's in. So now she has to deal with Jerry every night, who would probably be as nasty to her as Debra was.
Jerry is probably going to smother her with a pillow. I don't think she makes it through the summer.
I don't get it. This was only how many weeks in?
Yeah.
There is still X many of weeks left in this girl's summer vacation. And I'm pretty sure the next book that follows this, Lights Out Part 2, is literally Holly's death by Jerry. Kitt will be there torturing her, and Mick would have, done his rapey rape thing this book.
It's ridiculous. That second batch of kids is not coming in, I can tell you that. This camp has been in the news way too much at this point.
I can just see the headline, stepbrother of boy who died in camp, arrested for murder of counselor, of senior counselor.
At same camp.
At same camp.
Oof.
After attempted murder of another counselor.
Yeah.
On a wilderness trip. And by the way, this camp now has no wilderness trip leaders.
Yes.
So...
This is
going well, Uncle Billy. I'm glad that you are optimistic. Because I have looked at your odds.
And he's waiting on a loan from a bank right now.
Yes, that's the best part of it. Uncle Billy is waiting on a loan from a bank to keep his camp afloat.
The only way he can cover his operating expenses rest of the summer is if this loan goes through. If it doesn't go through, he has to shut down the camp. And if one more bad thing happens, the bank is already maybe not going to give him the loan, as it is.
But listen, Mr. Bank Person.
Look, we caught the murderer, okay?
Listen, the person who was responsible for the child's death last year, she got murdered. And then we caught her murderer. What else can go wrong, Bank Person? Please give me the money.
Yeah, forget the bank loan. His insurance company has probably set the rates through the roof at this point.
And if the second batch of kids, their parents, if they read the news, their kids aren't going to that camp.
They're not going to that camp. No way. Although the parents in this book series are really dumb in general, so if those kids are from
of that.
Yeah, if those kids are from Shady Side, they'll probably still go.
We have a section for nitpicks, but I feel like we've
discussed all the nitpicks at this point, just because we couldn't hold it in. It was just bothering us so much that it all came out during the character description and the in-depth plot. So, Fear Street Mythos. The camp is located near Shadyside, and they mention Central City, they mention Waynesbridge. This is definitely
Shadyside in Ohio.
Yeah, this is Shadyside A. It is not Shadyside B in Massachusetts.
That was in ski weekend.
90s things.
I think it was difficult to have many 90s things in this book because in the camp that I worked in, the kids are not allowed to have electronics. So they can't have their cell phones, no laptops, nothing. And that's the main thing you would use as a 90s thing. And it's just, the mindset is basically, if you're sending your kids to camp, let's have them have the full camp experience, and that would isolate them here. And the only contact they'll have with the outside world are the letters their parents will send them, or the letters they'll send to their parents, or their parents send magazines and stuff. And I don't even think the parents were really allowed to send care packages either.
Right.
So it was a very isolated experience. And this was not from the 90s. This is in the past decade that I worked in a camp that had those rules. So the only nice thing you could say is, when the counselors have their free time, they're not on cell phones or browsing the web. We had friends that worked in another camp up in Canada that even the counselors didn't have access to internet or anything, and they had to go into town if they wanted to browse the web. So I do think this is very hard to say, well, that's a 90s thing, because a lot of camps do this to this day.
There's not too many 90s things. It seems like a camp that could exist today, and just like you mentioned. How many red feathers out of 5 would you give Fear Street Lights Out?
I would give it 1. I think I'd give it half a feather, and that half a feather that I give it would round up to 1 feather. I hated the ending. Mick is not a good person. He has been sexually harassing her the entire book. He basically tortures her with the thing of leeches because Jerry asked him to, along with Kitt, and all of a sudden he says sorry and he's clean of anything that he's done wrong. Like, no, I'm sorry, that's not okay. Even if he as a character tried to redeem himself in some way, it should not be a relationship. Like, I'm sorry, Holly, what are you doing? I don't care if he looks like Kevin Bacon. That's probably the 90s thing, that he looks like Kevin Bacon. Footloose came out in the 1980s, right? Mm-hmm. So that's probably in the minds of pop culture, Kevin Bacon is the young, dangerous rebel guy.
Right, that's true. So I would also give this book half a feather that's been ground down by a pottery wheel and is slightly covered in blood. What a cruddy book.
I do think that the main reason this book gets any props and doesn't get zero feathers is I was nostalgic about the whole camping, working at a camp. I loved working in a camp. And also the finding of the body scene. Wow. My mind was a little blown that this was in a Fear Street book, and I thought it was really graphic, and I just had to give R.L. Stine props for having something that graphic.
Yeah, I'm really surprised you only gave it half a feather, because you're grading it on your Fear Street scale.
Well, I'm sorry, maybe he shouldn't have the sexual assaulter person come out as a hero in the end. I cannot. It's
pretty messed up.
And
especially after I went on a huge monologue about the gender balance and how R.L. Stine is sort of almost like a feminist or something, and now this happens.
Yes, the ending is so problematic for me. Even Kitt would have been a better choice because he never sexually harassed her. He just threw snakes at her.
It might be realistic because kids are dumb. Kids make poor choices. That's kind of what happens. So her making a poor choice here, well,
I mean, she was a person full of poor choices the entire book.
Right.
But it doesn't mean I have to like a book that ends like that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, didn't see it coming. Did you see this coming?
Like I said, I never thought it was Debra. I just thought she was way too bitchy to be the person. I thought Jerry was also like way too upfront with her horribleness to truly be. Because all of R.L. Stine's antagonists tend to be more normal-ish people, and then they have like their full psychotic break at the end of the book. So I was like, well, it can't be Jerry, it can't be Debra, but I really did not know who it was.
Yeah, Mick is like given this giant red herring, which is way too obvious, where he has like an Indian headdress or something in his cabin, and he's writing letters, and it's like, okay, no, it's still not him, because it's just too obvious.
Right, because he's also not that obvious in his writing. So it had to be John, Kitt, or Thea?
Yeah. Right? It could have been.
Because Thea didn't have much of a storyline in this book, and I thought it was weird that they just introduced her to sort of introduce the other characters. And you didn't really need her character there in any way, shape, or form, except to give Holly one person who didn't hate her guts the entire book. I think that was Thea's entire role.
Pretty much.
She didn't have anything else. She just was like, oh, John. Oh, there's John. Oh, okay. Well, Holly, let me introduce you to everyone. And that was her character.
Right.
And she didn't even give a shit about Holly's, like, investigation. This is, I think, the first book that I was not able to correctly predict who the person was.
Jerry is such an awful piece of shit of a human being. Holy crap, that really stands out.
I don't think we've had a character. No, I mean, we had the Bobby and other guy from Halloween Party who were pretty awful.
Yeah, they're not as bad as Jerry, though.
Because I don't think they really cared who they were hurting. They just were awful people, where she just directed her hatred towards one person. I think you really feel for Holly in this book. Thea is too busy lusting over John. Uncle Billy is trying to, like, save his dead corpse of a camp. And everyone else just hates her. But the thing is, like, Holly kept saying, like, wow, seeing how happy the campers are, that just, like, makes my day. And I just want things to go well because these campers are having so much fun. And I thought that was really admirable.
She's not the worst camp counselor ever. She just gets a really raw deal at a really, really shitty camp. She would have been fine working at another camp that was, like, normal.
But the thing is, Debra kind of had a point because, I mean, Holly was taking care of the kids. Like, she was very good with the kids. But is she ever doing any actual work in the camp?
There's a lot of scenes where she's just complaining to somebody about how everyone treats her poorly, or talking somebody's ears off about her crazy theories.
I don't think she actually does anything.
During the sports game with Camp Starlight, she spends the entire time just observing all the other counselors, trying to look for clues to see who done it. She herself does nothing the entire game.
Well, she's with the kids, and she does lead a cheer
at the end,
her cabin,
but she does nothing.
Yeah, she really does nothing. I mean, I could see why Debra hates her. Oh, the niece of the camp owner works here. And look, she's doing nothing. And Holly's always late to things.
Yeah.
Holly is never on time. So, like, I could see why Debra hates her, but she was, like, really bad about how she
You know what?
dealt with it.
Doing nothing is still better than doing something that leads to kids getting killed. So, in that sense, she's still better than Debra.
Well, Debra's dead. Do we really want to insult the dead?
I can't wait to get to the next book, because this one is just...
Yeah, this was, like I said, aside from nostalgia, I did feel for Holly. She is a character that you feel bad for.
So, what are we reading next?
Next is Fear Street, The Secret Bedroom. Don't open that door.
Okay, why don't I try to make a prediction here based on... Oh my god, this is hilarious. Okay, so we got a girl with short hair and jeans and a long sleeve shirt, and she's opening the door that she's not supposed to open. She looks really surprised because you see a skeletal hand trying to, like, keep the door closed. Like, hey, I'm in here. I guess, because the skeleton's not wearing any clothes. It's like, hey, let me throw something on before you walk in on me all naked, She's like, a naked skeleton, what? And there's like an eerie green glow coming out of the door. Okay, I think I'm getting something here. I have a feeling this is going to have a lot of Fear Street mythos in it. This glowing green glow, we might be onto some of the illicit organization trying to mine that mineral or whatever. Because remember the rhinestone... green glowing eyes or whatever? Wasn't that the same kind of glow? Were they green? I don't remember. They might have been green, and look at all this green glow coming from the secret bedroom. So I'm guessing that somebody is going to be staying over at somebody else's house for some reason. Some kind of family emergency, and they have to stay at somebody else's house. And so there's a secret bedroom there, and they're probably going to be told not to open it, and then they do. Of course, obviously, why wouldn't you? This is what happens in every book like this. And they're in for a surprise when they realize there's a skeleton in there. Okay, my idea is, you're going to have a male murder victim, and the weapon is going to be a gun, and it's going to be a male murderer.
I'll say that it's a house on Fear Street, and I'll say that maybe they're new there. Maybe she just moved in. I think it's about time we have a person who's just moved into Fear Street. I think the last one was missing. So I think it's about time we have new blood in this series. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the fact that they just moved to Fear Street. This is gonna be like the house in House of Leaves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And there's this door, and it doesn't make sense when you look at it, but there's a secret bedroom somewhere, and there's a door, and they're just like, what's going on? It actually looks like she's trying to close the door. The door opened, and she's like, oh my goodness, and she's trying to close it, and the skeleton's like, I want to close the door too, lady. And she's just like, oh, a skeleton? He's like, oh, a person. And they're both like,
I think the skeleton needs to go to the bathroom. And he's like, let me out. And she's like, no, don't use my bathroom. You're a skeleton. You're icky.
The murder victim, I'll say it's a male. The murderer is a male. The weapon, when I first read the scene in Lights Out, I thought she was actually murdered by the potter's wheel. Like someone just shoved her head right into it. And
right.
I was like, how would we have ever predicted that? But then he went with something like strangulation. It was like, you had something that cool and then you just bored it with like strangulation? That's so boring. So I guess we'll stick with something kind of boring. And I'll say a knife was involved. Either the victim or the murderer will be up here.
All right.
I think our predictions are locked.
Locked and loaded. All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining us for another exciting episode
of Rhett Read Podcast.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening to another thrilling episode of Rhett Read Podcast.
If you like what you hear, give us a shout out.
If not, let us know why in the comments.
Don't forget to rate, review, comment, share, like, and subscribe.
You can follow us at Rhett Read Podcast on Twitter and Facebook.
Or send suggestions or fan mail to red.read.podcast@gmail.com.
Until next time.
Peace!